it's on.
You can adjust it, or if that's good. All right. Give me a minute. I always get nervous with these things. How to start is always a problem for me. Well, thank you everybody for coming. My name is Riccio. I guess I should give you some background. I was a Waldorf student, and then to make a long story shorter, I got interested in anthroposophy, and I was told by a Christian community priest I should go to Germany and really study the foundation. I wanted to become a Waldorf teacher. So he said, go learn the German, don't go to England, don't stay here. And I followed his advice, and I went to Stuttgart, and I went to an anthroposophical foundation here with a man called Frank Teichmann. And it was a great year. We had speech, eurythmy, and every day we had text study. And one of the questions that I found in Germany, I never found in the United States, and that was that Steiner had form in his text. In other words, he just didn't compose something, he composed it in a certain way. And Teichmann had his own idea about that. But I must say, I did love the content of the book. When I first read it, I summarized every chapter and sent letters to my father, who at the time was sponsoring my German stay.
Which book are you reading?
Philosophy of Freedom. Yeah. So I was really enamored with everything. I loved the threefold social order stuff. We had great courses in Germany. And while I was at this seminar in Germany, I met a man called Florian Lautz. And Florian Lautz published the Chakra book, and he published one book in German, which is now out of print and is never to be reprinted again. And I even heard that the old copies were thrown out. So the Germans had really no interest in his work. It's kind of sad. So I noticed that some of you worked with O'Neill. A lot of what O'Neill knew, he never published and shared with people, except in study groups. And he was very careful not to tell anybody something they didn't really ask to hear. So I guess what my job is I had access. I was Florian Lautz's student, and he was like a father to me for about 7 years in Germany and later in New York. And I went on to Columbia University, and I wrote a dissertation about how this thinking and Waldorf come together. So those of you who knew that Gisela O'Neill, it was probably her job to write that book. She was probably more qualified than I am. And with time, I followed actually the same path. I stopped teaching this work. I had taught many branches, and I tried to bring my enthusiasm to Steiner's writing style and new style of meditation. And there are people who pick it up, but I see the same pattern again and again, is that people keep it for themselves and don't share. So I hope tonight to give you the enthusiasm that you take up this work. I think it's really rewarding. It also has its dangers. And for the next, 2 hours plus 6, I'm going to try to bring you to an experience of what happens when you read a Steiner book in the same way that you would read a musical score. It might sound a little strange, and I'm not talking poetically, I'm talking literally. So that when you read, you're going to do something that you normally don't do with a text. What else? So my question, the question that I'm going to answer tonight is, what is the logic of the heart? And then how do you practice it? So this will be, we're going to go to the text first, and then we're going to do exercises you might have to pair up. We're going to work with the text by making synopses and comparing. And I'll explain all of that slowly, why we do that. During this seminar, if you do not understand something I say, sometimes later I'll explain it, or if you have a question that you think is unrelated, just jump in and ask. I have no problem with that. Ask me anything. There's no such thing as a silly question. And a lot of this stuff has to be repeated over and over and over again. And I must admit, I was never really great at aspects of this work, and I always could pick up the phone and call Florian Lautz, someone who was really great at this work. And it's not like he has a hotline. I think he's on his last leg. He had heart surgery, and he hasn't been giving workshops anymore, which is kind of a shame. But yeah, if you have questions about him, we could talk about that later. First thing I'd like to do is just talk about why we do this logic of the heart, and it's something very specific. Normally I don't start with the why. Normally you have the experience and you might say, oh, why did you do this? Why did Steiner do this? But I'll start with the why, which is not usually what I do. The first reason is that if you understand the logic of the heart, you'll understand Steiner better. His books, his writing style, why, for example, I don't know if anybody's ever just looked at his punctuation. It's a big question. He really does some innovative stuff with punctuation, and it changes every book. These are questions that no one talks about, and Anthroposophical Press always ignores it in their newer editions. I always feel a little sad when they do that, because it's its own science. The other thing is, when you understand Steiner better, you can use his logic. So you start to look at his book as not just information, but models for your own writing, speaking, teaching, organizing meetings. There's a lot of uses for this that I hope by the end of this workshop you'll slowly agree with me. The next thing is the logic of a heart. When you're working with a philosophy of freedom, there's actually a meditation that goes with it, and I'll try to touch a little bit on that tomorrow. And this meditation has a result. It opens your heart chakra. So when you read this book in a certain way, like you would read a musical score, and you do it over and over, repeating the scales backwards and forwards, the content of a chapter, what ends up happening is your heart chakra blows open. And if you keep blowing your heart chakra open over and over and over again, your crown follows. And that's how you develop supersensible capacities. So the actual role of the philosophy of freedom is to help you keep your heart chakra open. So you would know that you're doing these meditations correctly is because you fall in love easily. I can tell you stories about that. I was in a study group in Germany, and I had 3 German students. When I say I had, they were in our group, and they had never dated before, and they were 25 and 26 and 26. And within 3 months, they all met their life partner, and one got divorced, the other 2 still happily married. But it was amazing to me, to put it in vernacular, 25, 26-year-old virgins. And within such a short time, the only thing that had changed in their life is they were meditating on the philosophy of freedom the way George O'Neill in Foreign Lands indicated. So when people ask me questions, I've had these experiences, I've seen it in my own life, that this is really true. That when you read correctly and meditate correctly, this goes open. Now, what happens if your heart chakra keeps opening? You start to release. And release has a lot of meanings. When you keep opening up your heart chakra, or, I mean, it could happen anywhere, sports, you could have emotional release. When you're doing something that's intensely pleasurable, a lot of your issues come up. So you start releasing, let's say, those dark spots. And this is very interesting because I've had friends, their release continued for 3 months. They fell into a heavy depression, but they were prepared. So when it happened, they had been studying this thinking for a number of months, 7 months, 8 months, and they had the release. And there's other ones that come with time as you practice. But this is what Steiner referred to as the catharsis in the philosophy of freedom. It wasn't a mental catharsis, it's an actual physical, spiritual catharsis, meaning you're letting a little bit of your junk out each time. This is what you have to look forward to, something unique. And you know, if you read a lot of Steiner, you might have already had one. Go to a great yoga class, the same thing can happen, right? Anytime you're stimulating your bodies and bringing them in harmony.
Wait, is this what Steiner talks about as a modern yoga then?
In a certain sense, that's a very loose word when he used it, but sure, it is a kind of a yoga. Because what does yoga do? It harmonizes your bodies. And what I'm going to hopefully show you is that if you're meditating in this organic way, you're harmonizing your physical, etheric, astral, ego bodies in a way that, for example, might happen in a yoga class, a eurythmy class, running a marathon. You know, there's different ways. Doing intense meditations. Louise Hay, you know, releasing fixed ideas you have. I mean, there's different ways of doing it. This one is unique because of the way you expand your consciousness. You actually become smarter by becoming more awake and aware through this Steinerian meditation, which can't be claimed with some of the other ones in the same way.
Right.
But yes, it's a kind of yoga. But a lot of what people write, I would kind of disagree with. They call it yoga of breathing. I mean, that's fine, that's an aspect of it, but that's not really, it's not high enough. The bar's not set high enough. It's just a yoga of concept, percept, breathing, etc. Yeah, it's a little abstract and intellectual. Another thing is that when you understand the logic of the heart, the purpose of some of Steiner's, let's say, institutions, the purpose of Waldorf changes a little bit. So if you know, for example, that actually the purpose of a Waldorf school was to inaugurate a new type of teacher. And the new type of teacher would model a new type of thinking and feeling and willing that's qualitatively different than what you know. So of course we want loving people, that's always a prerequisite. But the actual technique of the logic of the heart is the part that's missing, even though many people are born with it. I mean, you can't recognize this thinking unless you already have it somewhere in like germinal form, right? So some of you might, after this lecture, be like, oh yeah, I kind of knew that, and some of you be like, it's crazy. I won't judge you though, I promise. Let's see, how is everybody doing? Is this a lot? We're okay? Okay, normally I would say, if everybody just take a deep breath for a second, I hope this will be pleasurable. Don't, everybody stand up a second. It has to be light because this is heavy. It's kind of like a church. Maybe everyone, I don't know. If we make a quick circle, just hold hands, check the energy in the room. It has to be light, please. If it's not light, we're all going to die. Yeah.
We're going to get grave.
I usually do this before we get started with the text so we don't go into our head break-in. It's nice to see all of you. I'd ask you just to feel your hands on the person next to you. Feel your feet grounded into the earth a little bit. Everybody breathe deeply 3 times, slowly. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. One more time. Breathe in. Breathe out. Try to balance your energy with your partner's hand. Feel it go around the circle completely. Feel the heart space of everybody. Feel their feet grounded in the earth. Call upon a little joy. How's everybody's breathing? Good? Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. We'll get started. I'm going to do a couple of background terms. Who's not familiar with the ninefold human being? Does that ring a bell from Theosophy? Is everybody okay? No? Okay. I have to go through this when we read. Everyone knows there's 3 souls, 3 spirits, right? 3 bodies. And the 3 souls are, there's a consciousness soul. There's an intellectual soul. And there's something called a sentient soul. And then below that you have your physical body, etheric body, and your astral body. Right now those aren't so important. So for those who are not totally familiar, your sentient soul is what the Egyptians possessed. And so their architecture was fantastic. They lived in harmony. If you go to Italy, you see how the buildings kind of intermix beautifully with the landscape, because the Italians have a wonderfully competent sentient soul. Well, in America, that's not always the case, right? Intellectual soul is the soul of logic, argument, politics, right? So your argumentative nature, when you're not really seeking truth, that's your intellectual soul talking. There's a great story. I had a friend. She was from France. She looked at the door. She said it's crooked. The carpenter put that, that bubble.
Level.
What is that called?
Level.
Yeah. And she says, I don't care. It's still crooked, right? So that's the kind of the intellectual soul doesn't really care about reality. It's based on their feeling. And then you have the consciousness soul. And the consciousness soul is our first attempt as human beings to see what's actually true, right? So the British with their scientific method and anthroposophy with its spiritual method is an attempt to really get past this intellectual culture and go deeper, like quantum physics. So when you're able to start thinking in a new way, it has nothing to do with argument or harmony. It's seeking something higher. So this consciousness soul is nothing like the intellectual soul. It's seeking truth. In logic, truth is like A is to B is to C, right? And A is to C. And you can basically justify anything you want with logic. Consciousness soul doesn't justify or argue, right? But what it does do is its knowledge is dynamic or organic knowledge. Everything's interconnected in some way. So I'm going to try to take you there. Now Steiner, in his preface, what we're going to read, he uses this word soul region. And a lot of people think he's talking poetically. But if we're talking soul region, which soul do you think Steiner's talking about?
All of it.
On one aspect, all of it, sure. But what's the part that we don't really possess yet? The consciousness soul. So if you don't possess it, you don't really know what it is, so you don't know when you're doing it, right? That's one of the things. We all know logic because we've been taught logic for almost 2,000 years, right? A little bit longer. That we can identify. But we don't really know what a new thinking is. And so what I'm going to argue is show you how in his books he actually uses a new thinking. Is everybody familiar with Goethe?
Yes.
Oh, great. So Goethe had this archetypal plant. And this is going to be kind of the model for the seminar. So you have a seed. Can you see that?
No.
No. Can you see this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I won't use color. And the seed then turns into a leaf. Ah, look at that artist coming out. I'm joking, I'm a terrible handwriting artist. And what happens, what's the next stage in the archetypal plant? Seed, leaf,
Bud.
bud. The stem is also kind of the expansion. And after the bud?
Flower.
Flower, okay. And then what's the next stage after the flower?
Seed. Pollen.
Who said? Pollen. So it's the pistil and stamen. And then if that's successful, if they're fertilized,
Fruit.
the fruit. And then after the fruit, what's left over? Seed. Okay, quickly, what pattern do you see there?
7.
Okay, there's 7. What's the second pattern you see?
Big little, big little, big little.
Yeah. So what is that called according to Goethe?
Breathing.
Breathing, contraction, expansion, but he actually just called it rhythm. So a plant, even in its form, has a rhythm. It contracts and expands, contracts and expands. Is that clear? Good. Can you find another lawfulness? There's 4.
It's ongoing.
What do you mean?
The cycle repeats.
Okay, the cycle repeats. So
Continue.
let's look at the cycle. Where's the high point of the cycle?
Blossom.
Yeah, the blossom. So let's look at it this way. Sorry about the art, guys. And my posture too. My mom always complained she wasted all that money on roller school. Okay, look at it now. So you have your contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. Find another lawfulness there. Yes?
Well, you have a outward kind of activity where the seed, and then you can see the leaf, and then you can see the bud, and then you can see the flower.
Okay.
And then on the other side, things start to happen that are kind of invisible.
Okay. So the leaf is kind of two-dimensional or one-dimensional. The bud is really a leaf that comes to a point. It's not the big fat bud. And then the flower also has kind of an external. So this part is external, and this part has an invisible or internal aspect, right? Does everybody agree with that? So you can't see the pistil and stamen. The process is inside of the fruit. It has three-dimensionality, right?
Right? You don't see the seeds growing inside
Right, you
the
don't
fruit.
see the seeds, but the leaf is see-through. This is basically see-through. What is that lawfulness called?
Inversion.
Inversion, right? Or Goethe called it Umstülpung, right? Umstülpung. It's a fancy word for inversion. So the flower turns inside out, from outer to inner. Now what you had brought up, this is the high point, so it grows up to the sun and then comes back down. But it always gets more and more complicated throughout the process, right? So the fruit is more complicated than the leaf, the fruit is more complicated than the bud, the flower is more complicated than the bud, so each stage becomes more complicated, and that is called enhancement. And there's one last law. We have rhythm, the breathing, enhancement, growing up and coming down, inversion. What else is left?
You have sort of a parallel.
Okay, so how are these parallel? You have this seed and those seeds. So what does polarity mean? You have north and south pole, they're both poles, but they're different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference between this seed and those seeds?
There isn't one.
Say it again.
There is no difference.
There is no difference externally. You couldn't tell them apart. So where is the difference?
One is one, it's one, and the other is many most of the times.
Okay, so in this case, from one, you have many. That's one polarity. How about internally? Internally. Seeds all look alike, right? But where is the difference between seed A and, let's say, seed B, if you're not looking at the numbers?
Well,
I thought it was the same so that you had repetition.
They are both seeds, but let's say this one's a little bit wiser. It went through a process. So it's polarity because they're both seeds, but yet at the same time different. Because they're not siblings, but kind of, right, mother and child.
So they have different clocks, internal clocks.
Right. Now, don't underestimate this seed. This seed is special. It made it through an evolution where most seeds kind of dissipate and get lost, right?
It's an evolution.
It's an evolution. So the difference is invisible. However, they're polar. So what you're going to look for in this new thinking is polarity. So all the great philosophers said, you're not thinking unless you're thinking in polarity. You have to think in contradiction. They're both seeds. They're the same but different. Let's take it up a notch. What's the polarity between the leaf and the fruit? Now, as it goes up, it should be more difficult, right? That's the enhancement principle. What's the function of the leaf?
catches light.
Catches light, what did you say?
Take in to be receptive.
Okay, so it receives, catches light, and what does it do with that light?
Makes food.
Yeah, food. And what does the fruit do? What's the function of the fruit?
It gives nourishment.
It gives nourishment, right? It feeds. So on this level, you could say there's a feeding level, right? It has function of providing nourishment. Which one is hard on the outside, soft on the inside?
The fruit.
Fruit is hard on the outside, soft on the inside. So the middle of a peach is soft.
Not stone fruit.
It's a stone, right? So it's actually, the leaf is hard on the outside, fibrous and soft on the inside, right? But from a certain point of view, you can reverse that, right? So we're going to play with these relationships a little bit, but yeah, this is hard on the inside, soft on the outside. What's the polarity between the pistil stamen and the bud? I'll give you $5. 10.
Maybe the form is similar, the form,
In what sense?
kind of small.
Okay, they're both contractions.
Mhm.
What's the difference in form?
Yeah. I have to say.
Well, the,
Say it.
No,
Please.
She didn't say the right thing.
What did she say?
one is receiving, and the other one is the giving one. They fit like a puzzle.
Okay, right, so this gets its impulse from within, right, and it's giving. This is receiving. Where does this receive from?
The outside.
Right, bees or pollination, and this gets its impulse from within.
So
Right.
it's receptive and creative.
It becomes a dual. It goes from a single impulse towards the bud, and then there's a duality there.
Right. I agree. So you see that in the shape of it too, right? And also this is kind of hidden, and this is visible. But as you go up, the polarities get harder, right? Where's the polarity in the flower by itself? Is there a polarity? What's that? No, yes?
It's both.
It's both. Tell me why.
Because it's receptive and creative. It receives light, et cetera, and water to keep it alive. But it's also creating another flower eventually.
Right. Okay. Or simply said, you also have the petals and the corona, right? But it's and it's also the ego of the plant. You don't name plants according to their seeds usually, but according to their flowers. You identify their personality, right? I mean, maybe somebody does it according to seeds. I haven't met them yet. So
But isn't there another polarity?
where?
The downward striving of the root and the upward striving of the stem?
Oh, okay. In this model, there's all sorts of polarities, right? And we're limited to this sevenfold, the Goethean one. So, but for example, if you have the seed, when it grows, you have the stem and the roots. But actually, this is represented in the leaf stage. It's the first expansion. So the plant doesn't just expand in the leaves, it expands in the roots and the stem, and so it's considered all part of an expansion stage. And when it stops expanding and the leaves grow out, a leaf grows and turns into a bud, says Goethe. So each of these stages is a leaf. A fruit is a fat leaf. A flower is a highly differentiated leaf. A seed is a dried out, crunchy little leaf, according to Goethe. Right? So, I don't know, if you get into philosophy, it's the entelechie, right? The Greeks said it's a self-determining organism. In other words, the flower doesn't grow up because it's pushing. The flower grows into a vacuum, said Goethe, right, with the archetypal plant. So we're trying to reverse, in logical thinking, the cells grow and it builds really slowly. In Goethean thinking, it doesn't grow, it's vacuumed up. So before the plant grows, it sends like an etheric shape, and then the leaves grow into the etheric shape. I don't know if you saw that photography from Russia. They take a picture of an acorn and you can see a whole tree in the etheric space. It's a Carillion photography.
Yeah.
Anyway, you got to see that. That's just really cool. If you haven't read Sheldrake and those people, they're kind of our friends in this battle for new thinking. Any questions about this? If I were you, I would make a little sketch. I don't know if anybody has paper or if you have pens. Well, I can put it on the board again later, but we'll come back to this. Or if you have a good memory, just keep it in mind. So you have a new thinking in terms of organic thinking, you have 4 new laws. What are the old laws of logic? Anybody study logic in school? Any Catholics in the room? No? So the first law of logic is naming, right? This is a podium. The second law of logic is giving it a color or a trait. The wood, podium, podium wood, right? And the third law of logic is syllogism. A is to B, B is to C, A is to C. And there are 16 syllogisms, and they dominate your mind. So if you look at a pie, and you'll get some of B, I'll get some of A, he'll get some of A and B. With our logical mind, we don't have to turn to our logic books and figure out what sum and part and all and part A, B, C. We do it automatically because logical thinking is part of it's in our language. You have to add 4 new laws into your logical thinking. So anybody go to a Waldorf school here? Oh, okay. So you remember when you were a little kid and you do that, going in and out? Why do you think you do that? Right? So Steiner's teaching you rhythm. So all those laws you'll find over again in eurythmy, music, especially Waldorf curriculum. And it's like, oh, that's so pretty, growing in. He doesn't think it's pretty. He thinks it's really important for this new consciousness soul thinking. That's why we did it. Or that clapping, where you skip one, it's doing the same thing as this thinking. It's making a curve, if you look at half those exercises. I thought I would drop that. Okay. Now, in order to go any further, we just have to... There's 2 types of books. What are the 2 types?
Fact and fiction.
What's that?
Fact and fiction.
Fact and fiction, right? And according to Steiner, he said there's 2 types of books. There's his type of writing, and there's the other type, right? Now, to be fair, Steiner also pointed to other authors who seem to have his type of thinking. So, if you read a textbook or any nonfiction book, the author makes an argument, gives proof, justifies it. And this is your typical logical book. Any textbook, most of the books you read in the nonfiction section. A logical book goes from A to B to C to D, and then ends again with A, usually in the conclusion. One thing that a logical book is formless. Do you ever get in a conversation with somebody and it keeps going back and forth and it never ends and they always have something new? Steiner doesn't like that, right? So everything, he starts with his conclusion. He saves you that torture of our logical mind. You ever talk to someone and you start talking about, I don't know, sea creatures, and you end up at the sushi place, and then you talk about someone you met at the sushi place who just got divorced, and there's not an organic sequence of ideas. That's what our logical thinking does. It just goes any which way according to the feeling. So even when we use logic, you usually present an argument and you're finished. Steiner didn't do that. In living thinking, or in a Steiner book, you're not reading just for the argument, you're reading the gestalt. It's like a musical piece. The individual notes have no significance. It's how the notes are brought together. And that's the same principle in a Steiner book. It's the gestalt.
I don't know what that word means.
In this sense, a less fancy word would be simply a form. The problem. So in classical, let's say Plato said in order for a work, whether it's art or philosophy, to be true, it had to have symmetry. So a gestalt, usually a painting or even a musical piece, has some kind of symmetry. That's the first law of beauty, according to Plato. It has to be symmetric. So if you look at someone's face, if my face is off, in some countries, if your face is off just a little bit, people think you're of the devil, right? So there's something that we associate with beauty and perfection and truth and symmetry. So even in the waveform, there's some symmetry. So this is all connected. So Plato was the first guy who tried to talk about this. He talked about eros, love, in his own way. Excuse me one second. The other thing, in logic, there's an understanding, an argument. In this living thinking, truth is relational. So in Goethe's plant, if you're missing one part of this model, you can't understand the organic plant. The truth is only in comparison between seed A, seed B, the leaf and the fruit, the whole growing. You have to see every or all of the 7 aspects at once and compare them. And you're not going, I don't like think about the seed and then think about all these things like free associate with the seed. I think in the rhythm of contraction expansion. It has the same, let's say, rigidity as music. When I play a musical piece, I don't just make up stuff. I try to get into the spirit of the piece and see how the parts relate to the whole. If I'm in a small room, I have to play quietly. If I'm in a large room, I have to play loud, etc. So everything is relational. So in this new living thinking, truth is relational. So there's no right answer. There are many answers. I'll explain this a little later. It'll come up again.
Mark,
Yes.
could you explain just a little bit more? When you say logic is formless, I kind of get what you mean, but in reality, we tend to think of logic as being entirely too formed.
Oh, I see. Sure. For example, just your average person, and it's even in some books, we go from A to B in subject matter.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you'll see in conversation on a news program, it doesn't matter where, the person jumps to Z, ends up in Y, goes back to B, only to come to C.
Right, but I
is
normally
formless.
don't consider that to be logic.
It's in the spirit of logic because in logic
Oh,
you
because
can
they're
judge.
arguing, they're using
Logic
their...
is only true when your premises are true, but in fact premises are a lie. So the German philosopher Fichte said A never equals B. Any child knows A only equals A.
I see. So since logic, in a sense, doesn't lead you to any truth, you're going to end up saying any old thing to prove your point.
Right, and
I
it's
see.
correct. The nature of logic is everybody's basically correct in their argument.
Got it.
Like a
Within
conspiracy
some-
theory.
What's that?
Like conspiracy theory.
For example.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that seems like they bring together elements that really weren't meant to be brought together, but somehow it created, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it all seems to fit
And
somehow.
you can create an event and create many different, and they all seem plausible.
Right, and they always move back and forth,
Right.
as opposed to really looking at something as a process, organically, covering the details slowly. The other thing is that each aspect is new. In living thinking, you're sticking with one aspect.
I think the thing about logic today is that you state, well, if you look at, you state something that you believe is true, and then you argue against the possible alternatives to that. And I think that's the highest form of logic that we have. It's not arguing for the truth, but it's arguing against the possibilities that deny that truth that we state, because we, as he says in the philosophy, intuit. That's what our thinking does, it intuits.
Right.
So we know the truth, but we have all these subjective beliefs that contradict the truth. So what we have to do in logic is refute anyway, that's what occurred to me actually.
Okay, I mean, there's a lot of things to this. It depends on which philosopher you choose. But if I say, I eat bread, then you realize that's a lie. What does eat mean? What is I? My mouth chews, there's digestion. So we always use simplifications in language. So the whole idea of spiritual truths is you really can't express them, no matter what you do, right? They're only for you. Only you can know them. So this is Steiner's, this kind of not bizarre attempt, but it is in a way, is to move beyond language by using a completely different logic with a completely different function. It's not that you don't need logic, you need logic, but it's not the only method of expressing, and the fact that it's formless or even a well-constructed book will have a very tight argument, but it won't move people. So one of the things I did is I took the two most anthologized poems in the English language, William Blake and The Road Less Traveled. They have perfect Steinerian forms. Have you read the Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright?
Mm-hmm.
You know, academics have no idea what it's saying. They can't agree. So why is it the most anthologized poem in the English language? It can't be the content. It has to be the form. What else is there? Right? Because it doesn't give you any message that you can walk away from. And Rilke never makes it into those anthologies. Sorry, I need to go fast. All right, well, we'll come back to this. Don't worry, we'll have plenty of time. Can everybody get a partner? Let me hand these out. We're going to go through this text. Normally I go through it with you. What you're going to do is you're going to make quick synopses. Yeah, it's a quick Georgian one.
Everybody takes one, right? Or do two people take one?
Yeah, if there's not enough, maybe people
Alice
can
has
share.
one. Alice doesn't have
There should be.
Oh, we need one for Alice.
one. That whole end of the table needs.
That whole end of the table needs.
Does anyone need a partner?
I have one more.
You want to be the partner?
No, I want to be his partner.
Okay. You want to come join us?
William Blake and Frost.
We need a more partner
The
up
two
here.
most anthologists.
We have 5, we need a 6.
That's Lowndes and mine. But it's similar to, none of the translations are radical breakthroughs. They're all fairly good. Where they're weak is in the punctuation. They connect paragraphs and stuff like that. Yeah, they're all pretty good, but like I said, there's small little problems where they start to change the punctuation.
Does anybody need another one of
And
these?
then it doesn't work. That's the main problem.
Right.
Okay, let me give you a little background. There are two texts. They're the preface to the Philosophy of Freedom and the second appendix. And they're both, what's the word? They're both kind of prefaces. So what we're going to do is quickly read this. What I want you to do with your partner, just look at the main idea or main topic of each paragraph. Write 1 or 2 words on this bottom part.
Of paragraphs 1 through 9?
That's paragraph 1 through 9. You're going to read all 6 paragraphs. So read quickly. Okay, I'll show you how to do this once, because you've got to just trust yourself. Trust your instinct. Don't think, just read it. So I'll read this one out loud, and I'll ask you what the main topic is. Ready? 2 root questions of the human soul life are the focal point toward which everything is directed that will be discussed in this book. So quickly, what's the main topic?
Two
All right,
questions.
circle that. Because Steiner doesn't do anything by accident. The first sentence will usually tell you everything, with minor exceptions. So there are 2 questions. Make a note of those 2 questions. The first question is whether it is possible to view the human being in such a way that this view proves itself to be a support for everything else which comes to meet the human being through experience or science, which give him the feeling that it could not support itself. What is the second question about? Now, you see how long that sentence was? Are there any editors in this audience?
Yeah.
How would you edit that
Support
sentence?
for everything which gives.
Right? Is that a good
The
writing
feeling.
style? No. So why did he write that way, right? So I'll get into that. I'll prove that it actually not only is a bad writing style, but it has a purpose.
Question.
Yes.
What about this whole element of translation from German? Doesn't matter.
I could talk to you for hours about that, but it does matter completely. All of the English translations are wrong. Not because the word for word, but because what they do with the structure of the text.
And it's easier
Valerie.
and it's already interpretation.
Valerie.
Yeah, they take it apart.
Valerie.
Yeah, oh, that's right. It is sometimes. But what is sentence 2 about? What's the first question? You're overreading. Feel it. It's in the second clause.
Support for everything?
What's the subject? The first question is the possibility of what?
Support.
To view the human being.
To view the human being. So
That's
it's
all
about,
it's
it's a question of viewing the human being. Circle that. Just circle it. Don't understand it, because you can't understand it in isolation. If I tell you anything a million times that will really help you, nothing in isolation. So first you got to know what it says, but then you got to get ready to compare it if you want to get its essence. Next, sentence 3. Thereby one could be easily driven by doubt and critical judgment into the realm of uncertainty. Right? Nothing new there. The other question is this: can the human being, as a being of will, claim free will for himself, or is such freehood a mere illusion which arises in him because he's not aware of the workings of necessity on which, as any other natural event, his will depends? What's the second question?
Is there free will?
Freedom. Put that down. Circle that. This is how you do it quickly. When you sketch someone, you don't sketch the details of their hair. You start with a circle and a line. We're doing that circle and line. We're just getting the skeleton. Next one. No artificial spinning of thoughts calls this question forth. It comes to the soul quite naturally in a particular state of soul. And one can feel that something in the soul would decline from what it should be if it did not for once confront with the mightiest possible earnest questioning the two possibilities, freehood or necessity of will. In this book, it will be shown that the soul experiences, which the human being must discover through the second question, depend upon which point of view he is able to take towards the first. So which question depends on which?
Freedom depends on your view of the human being.
Everybody circle that. Write that down.
Which?
Sentence 8. You got to kind of write it out, sheet extra. Last sentence. The attempt is made to prove that there is a certain view of the human being which can support his other knowledge, and furthermore to point out that with this justification, with the view, this view, a justification is won for the idea of freehood of will, if only that soul region is first found in which free will can unfold itself. What does the last sentence say? What do you need in order to answer the questions?
To find the spot of the soul.
Okay, so you need a soul realm. So this is what I kind of wanted you to do. So you have 2 questions. Everybody write this down in those 2 blank spaces. What are the questions? Question number 1 is?
Is there free will?
No, that's question number 2. Yeah, view of the human being. What's question 2?
Is the human being free?
Okay, so free will question, thank you. And what does the last sentence say? What's the big if?
Whether you find the region of the soul.
Okay, and what did we say the region of the soul is?
Consciousness, so.
Yeah, so it's something that we really don't know. You can't answer the questions in the book if you're not thinking with another soul. If you read the book logically, you're in trouble, because he didn't write it logically. It's kind of like you have your bicycle upside down. I mean, I'm sorry to be so crass, but it's really true. That's what's missing. That's what George found out, and he couldn't tell anybody because he likes to whisper. Did I just say that? Okay, can everybody with your partner read paragraph 2 amongst yourselves and make a synopsis?
The same paragraph 2?
Next page.
Yeah, 2 of 5.
Yeah, so if you have 2 people switch every sentence, move it along. Don't rack your brain on the meaning. Look for the essential topic of the paragraph, not its details.
Paragraph 2.
Paragraph 2, 2-5, next page.
Just reading it and seeing
1 through 5.
Yeah, it starts, the view, which is under discussion here, that paragraph.
Which is interesting.
What?
What am I looking for?
In the same way in the first,
Don't go to the first, just tell me what I'm looking for.
the topic.
A topic.
Yeah. The question. The question. What is the question? The topic.
Well, I guess it would be a truly within soul.
Are we partners? Okay, I guess so.
I think it's the view.
Yeah, go through all of them and circle as you read, and then go back.
The view can be integrated as a member of the truly living soul life.
Can be integrated as a member of the truly living soul. Okay. There is no theoretical answer given that once acquired can be carried about as a conviction.
Don't read out loud.
I thought we're doing this together.
Oh, okay, then I have to listen. Go ahead.
We're partners here.
Okay, so start again.
Maybe you don't want me as a partner. Okay, so there's no theoretical answer given. Once acquired, can be carried about.
Can be carried about.
Okay, there is no theoretical
answer. There's no theoretical answer given
that's the
that
one.
once acquired can be carried about as a conviction, merely preserved in memory. Okay, so what are we looking for?
Sort of the main hit of this.
Okay, the main hit is that there's no theoretical answer where if you get it, now it's going to be carried around as a conviction.
Right, there is no theoretical answer.
Yeah,
Period.
no theoretical answer. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Okay. 3. This kind of answer would only be an illusory one for the type of thinking which is the foundation of this book.
You know what? We're going to do it again tomorrow. The same
So
way.
that's
We're not going to miss
kind of
anything. There's so much here.
Yeah.
We could do this for 6
The
months.
illusion
Illusory
Illusory?
That dense.
would be illusory.
right. Not such a finished, fixed answer is given, rather a definite region of soul experience is referred to, in which
Region
one,
of soul experience
Right.
is referred to.
in which one may, through the inner activity of the soul itself, answer the question livingly anew at any moment he or she requires.
Rather, a definite region of the soul
Right.
experience is referred to. You got that? Is that right? The true view of this region will be.
Don't not so fast. Read it. No, but you're reading so fast and mumbling.
The true view of this region will be.
No.
Will give the one who eventually finds the soul sphere
Where
these questions
Where the
these
soul
questions unfold, that which he needs for those two riddles of life, so that he may, so empowered, enter further into widths and depths of this enigmatic human life, into which need and destiny impel him.
to wander.
The true view of this region will be given to the one who eventually finds the soul, sphere,
Yeah. Just trust it.
where these questions unfold.
Everybody okay? What's the main topic of paragraph 2?
The view,
The foundation of the book. What is the foundation of the book?
Living thing.
Living thinking.
Okay, so that oh, we went a little fast. Okay, what word shows up in almost every sentence in that paragraph?
Living.
No theoretical.
Okay, so there's no theoretical answer, but there is a what? A view. What kind of view? Say it again.
Activity of the soul.
There's an activity. So if there's no theoretical answer, what does that mean? There's no theoretical. How do you spell theoretical?
T.
R. I'm so
That's close enough.
dyslexic. It's so hopeless.
T-I-C-A-L.
Okay, thank you. There's no theoretical answer, but there is an answer. And what did you said it before?
Inner activity of the
There's
soul.
an inner activity of the soul. And does that make sense? That kind of like, if I ask you a yes or no question and you just dance, you know what I mean? So if there's no theoretical answer, then you can't memorize the answer. So if you memorize the book, you're in a lot of trouble. Because he just said it right here, right? If you memorize it, you're basically misreading the book. Doesn't mean you can't remember what's in it, but if you think the answer comes out of the book like the Bible, well, I don't know why answers come out of the Bible, but preachers squeeze a lot out of there. What does the last sentence say real quick? If you find the view, what happens to you?
The true view of this
If you
region
find the true view, what happens to you?
eventually finds a soul sphere.
Yeah,
This
okay.
question.
Soul sphere is another synonym for the soul region. With the consciousness soul. So if you kind of climb up in your mind to this realm of pure movement, interactivity, right? What happens if you find it?
You enter the widths and depths of this enigmatic human life.
The answer to
Yeah, so if you actually read the book correctly, you enter into the riddles of life as need and destiny impel you to wander, right? So your basically your destiny changes. So if you read the book and you have a lot of clever answers, that's not what it's about. You should actually be fundamentally different. Your destiny should change, right? Just like it changed for the Greeks. I mean, the Greeks brought logic into the world and they practiced it. Quickly with your partner, read 3:1. It's one sentence.
A kind of knowledge seems thereby to be pointed to, which, through its own inner life and by the connectedness of this inner life to the whole life of the human soul, proves its validity and usefulness. This is sort of like we hold these truths to be self-evident, right?
Kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
A kind of knowledge.
Yeah. A kind of knowledge seems thereby pointed to which
Through its own kind of knowledge, through its own inner life. Knowledge through its own inner life.
the connectedness
And
of
by
this.
connectedness of this inner life
Right? And according to
to
Steiner,
the
that's
whole
man's
life
freedom,
of the
right?
human soul.
There's not one right answer.
Kind of knowledge
Right,
through its own inner life.
Which word shows
So-
up the most?
Connectedness of this inner
So the
life
synopsis is not.
to the whole life of the soul
But
proves
that
its,
said, there's a
proves
lot of
its
freedom for
validity
in the study.
and
Those are
usefulness.
the type of synopses.
Okay, so rather
that
rather
people
than a
make who read carefully.
theoretical
So I'm not judgmental in that way.
opinion, like trying to prove the truth of
What's the
through-
subject of the
he's not
third
trying
sentence?
to prove the truthfulness of it
Knowledge.
by argument.
And what kind
But
of
by,
knowledge is this?
The validity will be proven by
Okay,
its
it's inner
usefulness.
knowledge. And what's the value of that knowledge?
usefulness.
It's useful, right? Oh, knowledge is useful,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what's the other adjective? Useful and valuable.
Valid.
Valid, thank you. I make up stuff as I go. Oh. Is that okay?
Mhm.
And now, if you want to reread it again, which we'll do later, you'll see the knowledge has to do with your life and the whole life of the human soul. Why? Because a part of your soul is missing. You don't have the consciousness soul disk. You have a hard drive, but the disk is missing. You need the disk. The disk is the activity. You're missing that. We're all missing that. We're working towards that, right? You need a new thinking to fill that disk because it's the relationship of that inner life to the whole human soul. The whole human soul is missing something. Paragraph 410. Breathe and then read it through.
Next page. This is really hard for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, this is the kind of stuff we should have done with Christina, Irina. This is the kind of stuff.
This is what I thought about the content of the book when I wrote it down 25 years ago.
I thought about the content.
Okay, so this is
What I thought.
what I thought about the content of the book.
Yeah.
Today, too, I have to write down such sentences if I want to characterize the purpose of the thoughts of this book. Write down the sentences.
Mm-hmm.
At the original writing, I limited myself to say no more than that, which is the utmost closest sense, in the utmost closest sense is connected with the two basic questions referred to here. Two basic questions is, what are the questions again?
Two questions, soul
View of the-
region, free
View
will.
of the human being, and are we free?
What? View of the human
What is the view?
and free will.
Yeah. View of human being and free will? Question mark. At the original writing, I limited myself to say no more than that which in the utmost closest sense is connected with the two basic questions. Okay, so he's going to stick to these two basic questions. If someone should be amazed that he finds in the book no reference to that region of the world of spiritual experience which came to expression in my later writings, he should bear in mind that in those days I did not, however, want to give a description of results of spiritual research, but I wanted to build first the foundation on which such results rest. So it's a foundation for spiritual research. So that's why Betty says this is the one book that you can read.
The suffering
Steiner's
coming in
that
yet?
doesn't go into any
Right? You
spiritual
like reading
research.
Steiner, right?
This philosophy of freehood does not contain any such specific spiritual results any more than it contains specific results of other fields of knowledge. But he who strives to attain certainty for such cognition cannot, in my view, ignore that which it does indeed contain. So if you want
Okay, before you guys kill yourself, what is the main topic of this paragraph 4? In the first sentence usually gives it away.
Content.
Yeah, the content of what book?
philosophy of
Okay,
freedom.
so the content of the philosophy, and what did he say he limited himself to?
The two questions.
Okay, so he just stuck with the two questions, which he basically said nothing, right? For 3 sentences. I stuck with the 2 questions for 3 sentences, he said. What does he promise is in the book? Do you remember?
No results of spiritual research.
So there's no spiritual results, and there's no results of any fields. What do you call a book that has no results?
No, he said no results of his spiritual research.
Oh, read the next sentence. Yeah. Okay. So he says it's a foundation for spiritual knowledge, but there's no spiritual knowledge in the book.
Right.
He says there's certainty for science, but there's no philosophy in the book. He said it himself. He says there's no results of spiritual stuff, there's no results of scientific stuff. But he did say there's a foundation for spiritual, and there's certainty for scientists. And what else did he say? There's foundation, there's certainty.
He says, so this book is for anybody who, for whatever reason, is just not interested in spiritual research.
Okay, so those are the scientists, right? So that gives them certainty. What does the last sentence mean? And this justification is so undertaken in these chapters, one need not look at my later valid experiences in order to find acceptable here, if one is able or wants to enter the particular style of the writing himself. What does that mean? How do you enter someone's writing style?
So you imitate.
Yeah, so you got to imitate the way he thinks. So, if you want a foundation for spiritual knowledge and certainty in science, you have to know the style. In German, it's even better. It's eingehen, which means to die into or enter into. So the style of writing, so in the English, we tried our best to enter into, to imitate the style of writing. If you think like him, you can also see spiritually, right? That's the suggestion in the book. So the book has nothing worth reading, he said himself. Although later in lecture he says, yeah, you should read it once. But everybody do 5-5? We're almost finished, then we'll take a break. And then you can eat something, and then we'll start again a little while after that. If that's okay. Or it's your chance, I guess, to run away.
Thus it seems to me that this book, on the one hand, assumes a position completely independent of my actual spiritual scientific writings, independent of my actual spiritual writings, yet on the other hand, it also stands in the closest possible connection to them. Because if you learn to think like this, you'll be able to understand his spiritual writings and maybe
His
you
book,
can do your own work.
on the one hand, assumes positions completely independent and closest possible. It also stands closest possible connections.
Right. Okay. These considerations brought me now, after 25 years, to republish the content of a text almost completely unchanged in all essential. So, okay, so he republished it unchanged.
Unchanged.
I have only made somewhat longer additions to a number of sections. Okay, the experiences I made with the incorrect interpretations of what I said caused me to publish comprehensive commentaries. Okay, so he got a bunch of incorrect interpretations as feedback, so he has published comprehensive commentaries. I changed only those places where what I said a quarter of a century ago seemed to me inappropriately formulated for the present time. So that's a little note that we can take in our...
Inappropriately formulated for the present time.
Okay, so I think what he's saying is that he didn't really change the basic text. He has made commentaries in response to people's misunderstandings, but he stands by the...
Everybody okay? What is paragraph 5 about? Anybody have some suggestions? Okay, so it's about, what's the main topic? So the additions have to do with what, in your opinion? Okay, so there's some misunderstandings and he republished the book, right? So he has additions that he republished? Did he change anything in the book?
No.
What did he change?
Some language.
Yeah, he changed some language. So he modernized the vocabulary from the old edition. And why did anything else stick out? What else did he change? Okay.
Commentaries on misunderstandings.
Yeah, why was it, you think, you always have good answers for something. Why are there misunderstandings, you think?
We're reading it incorrectly.
Yeah, because you're reading it incorrectly. So it's kind of his humor again. I made some changes because none of you understood my book. You know, his first book didn't sell. He was like lecturing for like 20 years. Nobody bought it. Like he only made 500 copies of his first Philosophy of Freedom. So it's kind of in the back shelf. So he wrote this preface. Remember he said, it could be important to people who are interested in spiritual things. So he's kind of asking the anthroposophists to buy his book. So here he says there were misunderstandings because they read it incorrectly, right? And if you look, paragraph 5 is polar to which paragraph, if there are 6 paragraphs? 2. So 2 tells you how to read it. 5 tells you you didn't read it correctly last time. Thank you, by the way. Back. Very nice. So there are misunderstandings about how to read it.
And he's separating his commentary from the text the way he originally wrote it.
Yes, the additions are at the end, addendum to each
And he
thing.
makes a special point.
There was
I
1 or
didn't
2
rewrite the
chapters he
book.
changed the paragraph number, but basically, yes, all he did was add these things, and they clarify how to read the book, including this. This is a clarification how to read the book.
Essentially, you changed nothing.
He changed nothing because it's the same. You know, there's the chapter number changed, but the chapters are almost all the same. He modernized the vocabulary a little bit. He changed some of the das to das, 1 S instead of Shafa's S. This is kind of important, I guess. 6, and then you can take a break. You've earned your break. Now with this one, read pretty quickly because there's no real gems in there. And you'll see my editors will cringe at the sentence length.
Success, now the book's sold out.
Says he.
Okay, the book has been sold out for many years. I nevertheless hesitated for a long time with the completion of this new edition, and it seems to me, in following the line of thought in the previous section, that today the same should be expressed which I asserted 25 years ago in reference to these questions. Which questions? Oh, the questions of whose view of the human being and are we free? I have asked myself again and again whether I might not discuss several topics of the numerous contemporary philosophical views put forward since the publication of the first edition. Right, so.
Wait. I have asked myself again and again whether I might not discuss several topics of the numerous contemporary philosophical views put forward since the. I've asked myself again and again whether I might not discuss.
In other words, other people have had views on freedom and the human being, and he's decided not to do that.
Right.
Yet. To do this in a way acceptable to me was impossible in recent times because of the demands of my pure spiritual scientific research. So in other words, I gave you this kit. I gave you this stuff. It stands. I got my own work to do. Learn to read my book. Shut up. Okay. Yet I have convinced myself now, after a most intense review of present-day philosophical work, that as tempting as such a discussion in itself would be, it is for what should be said through my book, not to be included in the same.
I didn't understand you. Yet I have convinced myself now, after a most intense review of the present-day philosophical work, that as tempting as such a discussion in itself would be, it is for what should be said through my book, not to be included in the same. Oh, I see. Again, the book stands on its own, and I don't have to justify it.
He doesn't have to go tweeting it. No tweeting.
What seemed to me necessary to say from the point of view of philosophy of freedom about the most recent philosophical directions can be found in the second volume of Riddles of Philosophy. Okay, what seemed...
Which is a continuation of the philosophy of freedom.
Yeah. What seemed to me necessary to say from the point of view about the most recent philosophical directions can be found. Okay, right. So referring to the most recent philosophical directions, it's in Riddles of Philosophy. I don't have to rewrite this one.
Right.
I'm not going to rewrite this one. Nothing's changed.
Right, and I'm not going to argue with people who have different views.
What does everybody have? What does he actually say in paragraph 6? Yes?
Well, he's saying, if you won't, all you have to do is read my book. Anybody has to read my book. I'm not going to argue with a bunch of people who have different views, and if you want to hear more about it, read the Riddles of Philosophy.
Okay, so he tells you in 5 sentences what he didn't do, right? He looked around, he asked himself, he hesitated, he looked around again, and what does the final sentence say? What seemed to me necessary to say from the point of view of the philosophy of freedom about the most philosophical directions can be found in the second volume of Riddles. So from the philosophy of freedom, if you want to get inclusive, no new philosophies, but from the philosophy of freedom, you have a second book, right? Anybody here read the Riddles of Philosophy? No? Okay.
No.
You didn't do that. Oh, you did? Oh, good. Great book, right?
I have it in German.
You did. So from one book, you get a second book. That's the only new thing, right? He had already told you earlier the book wasn't there. That's why he made changes to the second edition. So that's not new information that the book is sold out. The only new information is you have 2 books. So before we take a break, do you guys see any pattern here? Two questions of the human soul life, 2 questions, 1 freedom, free soul region. No theoretical answer, interactivity changes destiny, knowledge is useful and valid, the content of the philosophy of freedom gives you foundation and certainty if you find the style of the writing. The addition, misleading or misunderstandings, no changes in the book, 2 books. Okay, 2 books, 2 questions. Was it necessary for him to mention the Riddles of Philosophy? No. So it's almost like he made the content fit the form. Because who cares about the Riddles of Philosophy? You know, philosophy of freedom is going to be valid for another 10 million years. Why would he mention a book that's not important?
Because it clarifies all his criticisms of the philosophers that he speaks about in the
You know, actually, if you read the book, it's a celebration of Western philosophy.
Yeah.
It's not really a critique so much, right? You read it's like a textbook for high schoolers in philosophy. But it actually has no relationship. Which books are related to the philosophy of freedom content-wise?
Goethe's way of thinking.
Goethe's view and Nietzsche. Nietzsche is the philosophy. Steiner's book on Nietzsche is nothing but Nietzsche being Steiner's lap dummy. He uses Nietzsche to say he has the same philosophy as I do.
Charlie McCarthy.
But he made some mistakes that I didn't make, he said. Yes.
Okay, since we know that there's inversions afoot,
Okay.
I'm going to look at the second one and 5.
2 and 5. What's
2
the
and 5.
inversion?
So in 2, there's no theoretical answer.
Right.
And then 5, you get misunderstanding. So it would make sense that if you're constantly looking for a theoretical answer, then you're going to misunderstand the book.
Nice. Right? What's the main difference between, let's say if you were going to talk inversion, since Joan brought that up, what's the difference between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? Theme-wise, any difference you can find. You see how you have to keep comparing? You don't do that normally, unless you have 2 kids and you love one better. Right, New York humor is so stupid. I'm sorry.
Maybe it's like a blossoming and flourishing in
Where's the blossoming and flourishing?
the first half,
Why?
because it's basically like, I guess it's got a like a life quality, like an energy experience, like saying opening up, come in and like feel the life, feel the soul.
What's the topic of the first 3 paragraphs?
The book?
Yeah, the book. What's the topic of the second 3 paragraphs?
What's not in the book?
The readers.
The readers, right? The reader's reaction.
Justification.
Yeah. Anything else? All right, we're going to do this over and over again, but now you see the game. The game is to compare, and you'll find all sorts of patterns breathing from the second half, first half to the second half. Anybody see a rhythm between paragraph 1 and 2? Which one's the contraction, which one's the expansion?
Number 2 is the contraction because it's about interactivity. So
When you feel active, you feel contracted?
Counteractivity. No,
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
Oh, because it
inter-
goes inner activity.
Yeah, it's
I
inner.
see. Okay, that's good.
Okay.
I mean, these are reversible.
Right. So another way to look at it would be that an expansion would be 2 questions.
If
It's
you
a
wanna
question
play
is
that
an
game, you
expansion, and then an answer is no theoretical.
can. Right, so these 2 questions are in the book, it's a contraction. Then you could reverse it. This is the book, it's outer. Then she said the inner part would be the reading. So you can reverse those relations. That's a little advanced for tonight. But that's what O'Neill found, is that you can play. If you use the Our Father prayer, you ever read that Steiner lecture? That has so many options the way you can break it down. Steiner gives 2, I have 2 more. And these great pieces have these relationships. He didn't write this preface to inform you. He wrote this preface to play a game with you. This is about a game of learning new thinking, comparing. So on that note, please everybody, let's take a 15-minute break and we'll try to make it through what I planned and get you home soon. So, yeah, let's see. It's now 9:17. We start at 9:30, is that okay?
Yeah.